So what we're going to do in the last two parts of today is we're going to talk a little bit about dissemination of your results, which seems like quite an huge thing and an anticipatory, oh, what do you mean we're talking about dissemination right now? But it's actually a consideration to help you decide what sort of study am I doing? Is it research? Is it something? These are all the questions. Where would I like it to be picked up that might have a bearing on again, what type of methodology you might do, the purpose of the study, those sort of things. And we've talked a little bit about what might be the difference between reporting information and contributing new knowledge, which is what I was talking about a little bit before. So are we just reporting, are we reporting results as part of benchmarking, sharing information? Are we contributing to new knowledge? And also it's thinking about the relevance, potential use and level of the research findings. So again, we start to go back a full loop. And I spoke earlier today about when you're looking at the literature and you're thinking about and looking at the levels of evidence, and I was talking about the journals, remember I was talking about the impact factor of journals and those sort of things. This is also relevant at this point, which is where you start to, again, consider the ideas of levels of evidence. So what I've done is downloaded the new JBI levels of evidence, which gives you an idea of the type of studies and at what level they are. So the higher the level, the closer to one, apparently that's, sort of the U-Butte, high impact, very reliable, yada, yada, yada. But again, I think we're coming back to, it goes back to your topic. So your random control trial sits at level 1. But this, like anything, so if you talk to any qualitative researcher, levels, we have some issues with levels of evidence, just a little bit. And the argument continues. So I was talking to someone who was over at a qualitative methodologies conference in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, and there was a big discussion because of the challenge of getting qualitative research published in some of your higher impact journals. So I'm not going to take you through this in detail because, again, you look at it and go, oh my goodness, it just looks too hard. But it breaks it down into ideas of, if you were looking at, say, evidence for effectiveness, it gives you some ideas of the type of studies and the levels in which they're going to be using. So again, go back to evidence-based practice and remember in the definition it said best available evidence. If you looked in the Joanna Briggs and look at any of the evidence-based things, they talk about the levels. They talk about... Now, just being able to understand what that means is being able to understand some of that translation. So again, comes right back to your issue, Teresa, where you're thinking, oh my God, there's so much, I don't know where to start. I don't know what's going on, that sort of stuff. So again, the other thing too is you've got to then be realistic about, if I know where my levels, where it is, where it's pegged, it also gives you an idea of where you might think about disseminating your information. There are some areas that I just wouldn't ever consider because it's never going to cut the mustard. There's no point in submitting it to certain journals that only look at random control trials, that sort of stuff. So your type of study would be really picked up with nursing, health service type journals, BMC, Health BMC. Service Research is a good one.
Yeah, Journal of Nursing Management.
Yep, Journal of Nursing Management, Journal of Nursing Administration. There's another potential.
Nurse Administration Quarterly.
Yeah, so there's a few different ones. If you were disseminating information about policy, dealing with policy, because that's some of the things that you'd be looking at. There's nurse policy and, there's health policy and practice. There's a few nursing and health sciences. Journal of Clinical Nursing is another one.
And if it was midwifery, there's a raft.
Yeah, midwifery, a raft of things, yeah. So part of your study, one of the things you might think about from a study is it might be a team approach, and you might be part of a study where you gather some data from your midwifery team and you get information from Bendigo and information from, Western Australia. You're all dealing with the same tools here. And there's a great opportunity to do some really interesting research across St John of God. You've got Geraldine, you've got Warrnambool, but no, don't have babies. They don't have babies in Warrnambool anymore. Well, they do, but just not at St John's. Berwick's still having babies. Yep. So that's the other thing that you can start to sort of think about there. So that's really important. And again, for a study that looked at, say, your clinical assessment and your pressure injury tool, even some of the journals that you're looking at now, that's another clue too, is when you do your literature review, what are the journals that have got similar sort of things, that are talking about that sort of stuff? It gives you an idea of what their particular interest might be. So that becomes, depending on who's in the team and what you're doing it for. If you're part of a university team, you might be required to only submit to journals of certain impact factor. Do you have those boundaries at ACU? Yeah. So
Unless there's
a really good reason. Yeah. So it's all got to do with one of the issues with academia is a term called publish or perish. And that is there's a high demand for academics to actually get published. It's all about the profile of your work, how many citations you get. It has a direct impact on the profile of the university, and it becomes a very big cycle. The thing is if you're doing health service-based research and it's not connected to a university, you don't necessarily have the same restrictions. So at La Trobe University, we have to, the rule has got to be over 1. The impact factor needs to be over 1, not under 1, where we possibly can. Whereas if I was doing some research related to one of the health services and I was doing it in my role as an educator, I wouldn't have that limitation, because all they want to do is just get the information out. The thing to remember though, even if it's in a low impact journal, it's still out there. And so if you're doing a study and it's not part of you're not a career researcher, it's still a way of disseminating the information that you've got. And so that's the thing to think about. But the competition is so high, even your lower impact journals are quite difficult to get published in. There's what's called open access and closed access. So one way to get yourself published, sometimes a little bit more quickly, is to pay for the publication. So a lot of open access journals where you can just download the journal. You don't have to subscribe to the journal. They're open access journals. Now, just because you have to pay for that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily of lower standard. Okay, so some of your open access journals are still high standard journals. BMC is one of your examples. So one of my papers was published in BMC, and thank goodness the university paid for that.
I was just going to say there's caveats on some of those.
Yeah.
If the organisation subscribes to that particular group, then it's free for authors. But otherwise it's about $3,000 or $4,000.
Yeah, it is.
Which means that it's probably out of reach of most people.
Yeah. Whereas the most recent one, when I submitted it, it's not an open access journal, but I had the option to make the article open access. I would have paid a fee and the article could be open access. So why would you want to do that? Because if it's freely available, it's more easily accessible and more people are likely to read it and cite it. And it's all about citation, because the citations gives you an idea of the impact and the influence of what your knowledge and things. I happily didn't pay the money. And so, because let's face it, most people work in health services or are at universities and they've got access through the databases anyway, so, that sort of stuff. The same thing with journal. The other thing is conferences. You can disseminate your information through conferences and those sort of things. And they might become grey literature. A lot of conferences now also, or some of them will say will have special editions. They might be connected to journals and they'll have special editions. So you could do an article that complemented your conference paper. But you have to be very careful. And it's one of those sayings of, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And the thing is getting published in a journal or getting a conference paper across the line should be a hard process. It should be a little bit difficult. You should be, you send the paper in and it might need to go to the reviewers a couple of times. Be very suspicious of a conference or a journal that just accepts you willy-nilly. And when you get a little bit of a profile, what starts to happen is you get invited to everything. And it's you think, oh, wow. And I got an invitation to a journal out of the blue very early on, and I just wasn't too sure what it all meant. So I contacted my supervisors. Is this for real? And no. It's what's called predatory behaviour. So there are predatory journals and predatory conferences as well. I've been invited to, in the last couple of weeks, I've been invited to America, Europe, Malaysia. I've been invited to China so many times you have no idea. And as you present, and if you've presented internationally as well, that you end up on a database, and so you start to get. And so now I get letters going, oh, we have read your, and then the name of my article has been in, and we think you're really interesting and fabulous. Would you like to come and present, or But of course, what the fine print is, and it will cost you all this money, and basically, it's like the Nigerian scam. They're literally scammers that are doing this. So this again, oh yeah, it's huge. But some people are so desperate to get published, it means that it's like anything. If anyone's desperate enough, it opens the doors. So that's where, again, be in a team with some people who've got the know-how and the connections. And I think the interesting thing with the Western Alliance side of things that you need to think about is it gives us that link between the health service and the universities. And that's really nice. It's that nice sort of link to help part of the whole process is to try and get that swell of research that's going on in the Western District. So that's a useful sort of process as part of that. So there's some of the things. So you've got with your presentations, when you're looking at conferences, think local, think national, think international. You'd be amazed. So I've been to Northern America every year for the last 3 years. Sounds very impressive. I went to Halifax in Canada to present at a methodology conference, which was a part of the obligation of doing my thesis. Sounds really impressive. Got over there, spoke to 14 people because it wasn't a very big conference. It was very expensive. Fortunately, it was a bit of a holiday as well. But then with one of the rural hospitals that I work with, we've been to the largest aged care conference in America for the last 2 years presenting papers. And I'm talking 8,000 delegates. You should see the trade displays on these conferences. They are enormous. But it doesn't have to be that big. My question is does St John of God have research symposiums? Is that something to look at in the future where you can start to do, yeah, excellent. That's great. Now that's really important. That's really important stuff for those sort of things. And again, then looking at
next year too.
Yeah, look at next year. You can have all of this sort of stuff to sort of do. The other thing too, though, is that the landscape is changing a little bit. The research landscape is starting to go through with the changes in the political agenda. So I don't know what will happen in after the next election and who's in and who's not. But that, that idea of getting research happening that's innovative and being used, and it's very much part of being applied in the real world, and you've got your priority areas and those sort of things. That's part of trying to move away, the government trying to say, well, let's make sure we're just not undertaking research and publishing for the purpose of publishing. Again, it's coming back to why we're doing the research, in whose benefit is it? That sort of stuff. But it's like anything, priorities of government will drive agendas because that's where the funding is, and that's where it's like anything. Universities are just like hospitals. They have to generate income, and funding research income is another part of that. So sometimes you end up researching things not because it's what you're really interested in, but it's actually because that's what's attracting the funding. Which is actually one of the reasons why I've decided not to go into academia. So I'd prefer to stay in health and to work in rural health because that's my area of interest, and I'd prefer to work there rather than move. And again, it's where it's where I am in my career and stuff like that. But it's one of those things. This is where I'm really interested. I don't really want to have to, I'm not a career researcher as such. So it's part of that mix. So they're all sort of some of the things to think about. Again, even at that start of looking at, well, why would I want to do this? Again, what change do I want to affect? And part of that dissemination is part of that change. So there's a lot to think about, isn't there? A lot to think about. So what I'd like you to do now is flick over your page, because you think it is the end. You think the end is nigh, and yet is not. So the thing to think about now is to look at, well, what if I wanted to put a proposal together or put a submission of an idea for a research project? What could that look like? Could I turn my little scrappy topic that we came up with this morning into something that I could even start to, as a beginning point, come up with some ideas of what that could look like if I was going to put it in as a research proposal. So one of the things that the Western Alliance does is funds research projects in the region, and that's part of its agenda. And so the funding round for this year is about to close, but this is about starting to think about what might be possible for the next round. So what we did was we got permission from a couple of two lots of research teams that put in a submission for last year's funding round, and I've laminated them because they're coming back to me, they're numbered and coming back to me. But it gives you an idea where you can have a read and look at, well, what could that look like? This is not a full-on research, serious research university proposal, that great big sort of funding thing. The idea is to have proposals that are a little bit more grounded, that might be small research, the beginning of research, that sort of stuff. So what I'd like to do is have a little read of the research proposals here, and we might read them together if that's all right. Is that okay? So the first one, so this is 200 words. The word limit has gone up to 300 words now, but if we look at the first one, the risk of serious injury following falls in residential aged care continues to be a challenge and a serious risk. What's that? What's that first sentence?
Statement of fact.
Yeah, and what is it also? What's it telling us? What it's about, and it starts instantly about the so what, why this is important. There are many residents who have multiple falls, and despite implementing every relevant prevention strategy at times, often due to the dignity of the risk residents continue to fall. Often their falls are due to cognitive decline and not remembering to call for assistance. We've implemented a 20-minute rounding chart whereby staff document that they have observed the resident and met their needs every 20 minutes. Our preliminary data shows a reduction in falls using this method. So they've done something and they're thinking, oh, we're seeing something here. So they've probably done a QA and thought, oh, maybe there's something more here. There appears to be limited research available specifically around 20-minute rounding to back this up as evidence-based practice. So what that tells us is they've gone in and had a look at the literature, and there might be some stuff around 60-minute rounding, but is there some stuff around 20-minute? The aim of the research project is to determine if 20-minute rounding does reduce the risk of falls and therefore serious injury in aged care. This research would be collaborative with the 6 aged care campuses of WDHS and potentially throughout the region. On a personal level, it would increase my knowledge and skills to participate in research. So this is part of that nurturing, it's part of the nurturing role and trying to build research capacity and capabilities in the region. So the second one, well, what did you think about that one? What's your thoughts there? It's just plain language, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems
straightforward. Yep. So you don't have to worry. You need to start these things. Oh, it's got to be all academically written, and no, it's the idea is thought out. So another example is the research idea. So this is broken up a little bit differently. Farms are known to be a dangerous site for both work and leisure activities. A collaboration with Monash University provides the opportunity to follow a cohort of people who have previously suffered a farm-based injury resulting in major trauma. Building on existing literature, this study will measure the impacts on recovery after farm-related major trauma from incidents occurring in Victoria. The aim and potential innovation research has established morbidity and mortality rates after farm injury, but fewer studies have examined potential implications for post-injury. This paper will follow up a cohort of major trauma victims identified using the Victorian State Trauma Registry, so they're drawing on existing data. A data set. These people injured between 2007 and 2013 will be surveyed both by interview and questionnaire, so we've got some of our methods there, thus extending for a further year and expanding the breadth of data in that data set. Data obtained from this cohort will be based to measure the impact that farm-related major trauma has on re-injury, work capacity, financial outcomes and social impact. So even through those points, you can start to get a sense of what they're going to be asking, can't you? Sort of some of that scope of that study. Because it could be this big, couldn't it? You've got to narrow it down of what do I really want to know about. The benefits, so describe long-term health outcomes associated with farm-related major trauma, provide evidence to determine the necessity for improved rehabilitation services for farm-injured people, and identification of injuries with the greatest impact, allowing for the targeted prevention of programs. So you can see how that might be utilised and how that information might be shared. And there's an additional note about one of the team members who's obviously an expert in that area. And again, part of your submission is if you've got someone who's got a bit of profile or got academic experience or something like that, that can be really helpful and useful as part of that. So that's set out quite differently, isn't it? It's not too scary though, is it? Too scary? Not too scary? Not bad.
How would that look different if it was to the University of Adelaide or CQ
Oh, hugely.
ACU or like that seems quite doable.
Yeah.
But the university ones.
So because the purpose of these submissions is to start to grow some smaller research, it's more basic. Some of your bigger, if you're doing a research proposal for, say, a university, they've actually got their templates, and so it's more specific, and it would get you to fill in a lot more detail. There'd be a bit more around the background, those sort of things. But each university has its own requirements. If you're putting in for Commonwealth funding or something like that, oh my goodness, they're huge, and you've got to have big teams and be collaborating across universities, and they're really huge sort of studies. But it just depends. Every area is a little bit different.
It'd be quite prestigious to get a federal
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. A C1, isn't it called? A C1 study. And if you got, but you don't get a C1 study if you're a nobody, I can tell you now. So if you can get your name on a C1 study, woohoo, you know, that sort of stuff. So yeah, so there's a pecking order. But this is part of, look, the really interesting thing is where you disseminate this information is basically dependent on where you want to take it, and you know that sort of stuff. But the actual, and it also depends on the amount of funding. But this is a good stepping stone, isn't it, Renee? It's a good stepping stone into, and it's about research that's happening at a practical level as well. You know, it's those sort of, it's encouraging that sort of thing. So what I'd like you to do is spend a few minutes, just 5 minutes, going back to your original thoughts about your topic at this end of the day, and seeing whether you could do some dot points on the looking at what your study might actually look like. Now that we've gone through what we've gone through, some dot points, so on page 22, some dot points about, well, just what was the research idea? So go back to the real basics. What's the aim and what might be the potential innovation or benefit of that research? So just do 1 or 2 dot points for each one. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to come down with. As a group, yeah, just as a group. Just as a group, yeah. And so if you're beaming in, do the same. Have a look, go back to your original question and think about those 3 key points. How did you go with that now? If I'd asked you to do a proposal at the start of the day, what would you have said?
Oh, just give me a few hours.
You need a few hours, don't you?
Yeah.
What you've gone through today, has that helped you start to think about and frame up what it is that you need to do when you looking at an idea, just an idea for a potential research? So if you're really keen, what you can do is continue to grow that idea, or now that you've been through the process and some of the things to think about is to build on your own idea. If your idea in your partnership if that wasn't your idea, is there's another page where you can start to flesh out more. The other thing too is I think what's important now is you've got critical friends. So there's an opportunity for you guys to come together again to talk about, well, now that we've had some time to think about that, you know, what do we want to do, you know, those sort of things. And this is my opportunity to talk to you about the Western Alliance. So the Western Alliance is where this has all come from. And it's a collaboration of universities and health services across the Western district, the Western region. So all the way up to, it goes up to basically Hopetoun, because that's where Rural Northwest is, across to Horsham, right down to Portland and Geelong, and right back up again Ballarat. So all of the major health services, Federation Uni, Deakin. Is ACU part of it? No, I didn't think so. And the hospitals. So the idea is, and the PHN, the Primary Health Network as well. So what the idea is to try and build research capacity within the region and to actually get some of the evidence out there that's happening on the ground in rural areas as well, to engage people in research. Again, contribute to the evidence. So what this submissions for research project submissions to the Western Alliance is about is just submitting an idea for research, and those ideas get looked at and screened, and some will get picked up and say, yep, this looks like an interesting idea. We'll run a workshop for you to come, and you'll workshop that idea up and look at developing a research proposal, so a more formal proposal, and a research budget. So it's a staggered approach. But what happens with some of the submissions that come through that aren't quite fully formed, the idea is look, okay, you've had a go, but let's go back, do some more thinking, work a little bit more on that one, and come back to us, sort of the next year. So that's important. The other thing that the Alliance has been doing is running symposiums as well, and workshops like this one, and other workshops. So last year there was some introduction to workshops. They were lunchtime workshops, and it's looking at what other workshops might be useful for helping research capacity. Renee goes out to all the rural, regional areas and runs short sessions, paper bag sessions they're called, aren't they? To talk about research ideas. Lunchtime, paper bag, lunchtime sessions to start to get people talking about research. So I've got these sort of things here for you to have a look at, and look out for the symposium, the annual symposium that they have. And the great thing about the symposium, it's a really good place to disseminate some of your research ideas, or to get some early ideas around research and getting some feedback from people, and or people might sort of think, oh, that's a really good idea, you should do more research. So they have poster presentations, and also you can put in for abstracts and present. So that workshop's usually around the September, around that sort of time of the year each year. So look out for that as well. So irrespective of when you, even for those of people that are watching this, is go to the website, and that will tell you about what symposiums and workshops are coming up with.